Egypt's Constituent Assembly has adopted a draft constitution after a marathon vote overnight. Many, including liberals and the Coptic Church, have denounced it. They say the proposed laws restrict freedom of speech and religion. Opposition leader Mohamed ElBaradei has been equally critical. He says the charter belongs in the garbage bin of history. Well, let's take a look at the text. The draft limits the president to 8 years in power. Former President Hosni Mubarak, you'll recall, ruled Egypt for 30 years. It upholds the status of Islam and has retained the article defining the principles of Sharia as the main source of legislation. Religious freedom is now limited to only Islam, Christianity and Judaism. Opponents say this marginalizes minority religions. While a law that prohibits insulting a human is seen as an attempt to censor criticism of the president. Now, the draft also allows for civilians to be tried in military courts, backtracking on earlier proposals. Let's join Algeria's Sherine Tadros now, who is live for us overlooking Tahrir Square. Sherine, how is this all going down there in Tahrir Square?
Not very well at all. I mean, people have already gathered here, a few thousand people, to join the thousands who are already engaged in a sit-in for the past week. They're here to protest against the decree that was issued last week by the president, but also now against this constitution, the draft constitution that was passed last night by the Constituent Assembly. They're not just upset with the content of the constitution, as you just outlined there, but also the way in which it was rushed through. 85 out of the 100 members of the Constituent Assembly were actually present in that vote. The rest boycotted because they said that their concerns weren't being listened to. So you had a situation where most of the liberal secular forces weren't involved, weren't consulted all the way through this process and weren't voting at the last moment. There wasn't a single Christian member voting in that assembly last night, despite the fact that Christians make up over 10% of the population here. And there were only 4 women of the 100-member body. And all those 4 women belong to religious parties, the Salafi and the Muslim Brotherhood Party. So for the people here at least, this constitution is tainted. It's not seen as Egypt's constitution, it's being seen as the Muslim Brotherhood's constitution. And if at the end of the day the constitution is the foundation of a state, then if this constitution is adopted, then we're on very shaky ground in this country.
Right, and President Morsi, Sherine, is expected to call a referendum on this draft constitution. Just explain to our viewers why the rush to put through this constitution.
Well, really for political reasons. We're embroiled in this crisis since last week when the president issued this decree giving himself this unlimited power, immunity from judicial oversight. And the argument goes that once there's a constitution, once there's a referendum and it's been passed, then this decree can be annulled and it will lift the country out of the crisis. Unfortunately, though, you're going to have another crisis on your doorstep insofar as a lot of people won't be accepting this constitution because of various articles which people aren't happy with. In general, it's being seen as very religiously dominated, a lot of conservative clauses to do, for example, with the state guaranteeing moral and religious beliefs, and a lot of loose wording folly, which a lot of people are worried about, like a clause or an article that talks about not insulting people. Well, that could curb freedom of expression, according to lots of rights groups. So there's a lot of concern over this constitution and what will happen if people vote yes in a referendum.
So a lot of concerns for opponents, as you say, Sherine. So where do we go to now from here? What happens next? I mean, it's a pretty fluid and uncertain situation, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the structure is clear. The president now will okay the draft constitution, and then he has 2 weeks to call for a referendum. There is an issue insofar as this referendum would have to be supervised, according to the law, by judges. And you'll remember that a lot of those judges are actually on strike. So that could be a problem going forward. How are we going to supervise this referendum when so much of the judiciary is on strike? But in the meantime, you have these constant protests being called, one last Tuesday, one now on Friday, and then of course another one tomorrow at Cairo University by the Muslim Brotherhood. So you have a political crisis. We also have a crisis on the ground as well, with increasing polarization in the country and the potential, of course, for violence because of how divisive this constitution and the decree is.
Okay, Sherine, thank you very much. That's Algeria's Sherine Tadros live in Cairo for us.